On Thursday, the State Board of Education approved a 3% increase for undergraduate fees and tuition at Idaho's four-year institutions. Our friends at Idaho Education News have more on Thursday's board meeting, at which they approved the increase. This comes as conversations of student loan debt and cost of living have dominated the political discourse over the last few years. Here to discuss the cost of higher education and the role of higher ed in Idaho is Boise State University President Dr. Marlene Tromp. Thank you so much for joining us this week.
I'm so pleased to be here.
That 3% raise puts Boise State University undergraduate tuition and fees at $9,000. It's about a $250 increase. What's driving that increase?
Just like every business or organization, inflation has impacted us. And in fact, one of the striking things that we looked at is if you took the tuition rate prior to my arrival and you adjusted for inflation-adjusted dollars, we would be $400 less with what we're charging right now, given the rate of inflation. So we've worked really, really hard to be efficient, to create new efficiencies, and to keep costs low for our students, but we have to cover the basic costs of delivering that education.
Part of that basic cost of education is covering salary increases for your employees, and the legislature chose to only cover part of that, as historically they have done. Generally speaking, how do you think this legislative session treated higher education?
That's a complex question. I think it was different for different institutions and different kinds of institutions. We felt like the work we had done to communicate with our legislators about what we were trying to do for our students and for the state really resonated with people this year. And what we wanted to communicate was that we're really striving to work hard for Idaho. And we saw a lot of people that message really resonated with, that we're preparing students for the workforce, that the kind of investment that students are making in their education is going to make a huge difference in their lives personally and for the state overall. And in fact, one of the things that we're doing, Melissa, to really try to address, we understand that it's hard for families to afford education. And nationally, as there's been, this is true across the country, there's been a decrease in the amount of funding that's invested in public higher education in inflation-adjusted dollars. And as that decrease has happened nationally, that cost burden has shifted to families. So we're very conscious of that. So we have raised literally millions and millions of dollars since I've been at Boise State for student scholarships, because my goal before the end of our comprehensive campaign is that no student will have unmet financial need. No Idaho student will have unmet financial need at Boise State. So that message really resonated with our legislators. They can see the work we're doing to cover that financial burden for our students. They can see the work we're doing to get people ready for the workforce. And they've seen that we've been responsive to a lot of the questions they've asked and the things that they've wanted to explore on campus.
As you mentioned, this is not unique to Idaho at all, but what is unique to Idaho is Idaho Launch, which of course offers $8,000 grants for training and education for in-demand careers. BSU does of course offer some of those programs, but in general, as people are talking about how much student loan debt to take on, whether to pursue higher education, masters or doctorates, how do you convince prospective students that a four-year degree is still a good investment for them to make?
It's such a great question, and I'll tell you, when the chair of the San Francisco Federal Reserve, Idaho falls in her region, that's the second most powerful Federal Reserve in the country. When Mary Daly came around the state and she talked to young people about whether or not they were going to college, because the data, Melissa, is unequivocal. If you go to college, you're going to earn almost $1 million more over the course of your lifetime. You're going to have more financial stability. You're going to have more job stability. You're going to be healthier. The data is just unequivocal. But people are worried about spending that money. And so as she traveled around the state, she asked people, what are you making your decisions based on? And young people were saying, well, I have to buy a pickup truck. And she said, she shared this information with me, and she said they don't realize that that pickup truck is not going to serve them nearly as well in the long run as that degree. But we thought it's not so simple as that. We have to really think about how we communicate it. So we started gathering data, and 50% of our students graduate from Boise State with $0 in student loan debt, zero. And more than 50%. And of those who have some student loan debt, the average student loan debt for all 4 years of their education is less than the cost of a pickup truck. And so what we wanted to do is really speak to people about the things that were driving their concerns and help them understand what it means to get that degree in engineering and how it changes not just your life, but the lives of people in your family, or to get that degree in the health sciences, you know. So the options for what people can do and the way they can really transform their lives and help their communities in the state are so profound that if we can communicate that messaging and if we're providing that support for students, I think they're going to make that choice.
Does Idaho Launch change how you market programs that aren't classified as getting students ready for in-demand careers?
We are, you know, Launch has designated right now what those options are, and a huge swath of students have chosen to come to Boise State for those careers. And we're already seeing this generation of students who are really looking to understand much more than previous generations, are looking to understand how does this degree track to a professional career. So part of what we have to do is to help our students understand, regardless of what their major is, we have to get them out into the workforce and get them internships. We have to give them opportunities to do service learning. We have to give them that hands-on experience so they understand and they can share with employers how what they're learning in school translates into the workforce.
They're not your only audience that you have to convince. You also have to convince lawmakers that you're a good steward of public funds. You have to convince taxpayers that higher education is a good use of public funds. You have to convince parents that you're a good place where their students can land. How does that messaging change depending on who you're talking to?
Well, you know, in many ways, the pressures are the same. There's the financial pressures, there's the future pressures, and what we want to do is make sure that we help people understand what their future options are, how they're going to track through, how we're going to support the students as they move through. And one of the things people love about sending their kids to Boise is the incredible number of opportunities for things like internships or partnerships with industry or in their fields of study. Whether, you know, for example, they're studying public service and they want to be right down there at the Capitol, or they're studying communications and they want to come work for a place like Idaho Public Television. Those things are here and that's exciting for them, but it's also an incredibly safe city and it's an incredibly wonderful place to live. So we have all these advantages and we're giving students a lot of support in terms of scholarship funding, education about how to speak to their careers, and we've done something quite unusual at Boise State. We've integrated that future planning that students have for their career. You know, when I was an undergrad, people were starting to ask their senior year what they were going to do when they graduated. We actually integrate it into the curriculum. So you're thinking about what your future will look like from your freshman year. And that kind of planning changes the way people think about their college education too. So when we're talking to parents, we explain that. When we're talking to students, we help them see it. When we're talking to our legislators, we want them to know that we're the most efficient university degree delivery in the state. We get less money per student than any university in the state, and it costs less at Boise State to deliver a degree to that student than it does at any university in the state. So that efficiency means a lot to our lawmakers.
You're trying to sell this message and deliver this message when so much of the discourse, in addition to student fees and cost of living, is also driven by culture wars. First Amendment rights, academic freedom, conservative versus liberal faculty and speakers and students, and anti-Semitism versus students' right to protest. How do you navigate those concerns, especially when you're in a conservative state? Is your approach different than your colleagues who are in more liberal states?
I think my approach has been different than the approach of a lot of my colleagues in any kind of state. So when I arrived at Boise State, and there was a big flare-up of concerns right out of the gate. People made assumptions about what they thought I was going to do and what they thought the university was doing. And we were sort of the tip of the spear of a lot of those tension points. So we launched the Institute for Advancing American Values, which began as a series called Conviction and Conversation in Contested Times. And the idea behind that was, how do we bring people together who have strong convictions and disagree and still engage in dialogue in a meaningful way? Because that's where learning happens. That's what's at the heart of education. And so that grew into the Institute for Advancing American Values. And we've made a national mark with that effort, where people are looking at what we're doing and asking, how do we reproduce that kind of sustained dialogue on a campus? And we've actually seen this incredibly beneficial effect where people take up very different positions across the political spectrum on our campus. Students, faculty, staff disagree with each other very strongly, but they can all be present, they can all speak. They're having those events on campus on the same days sometimes. And what our students are getting is the opportunity to make up their own minds, to explore the full range of ideas, and we're not shutting down that discourse. And I think that really helps address the kind of tension points that we've seen on a lot of college campuses, where either students feel threatened or unheard, and we've made it a priority to ensure that our students understand that's an issue for us. In our Idaho Listens program that's traveled around the state, we've heard people in eastern Idaho, in Caldwell, in Coeur d'Alene, tell us that they felt like it was a balm to have that program come and to see people from the far left and the far right all talking on the same stage about what they value and why. Because when you can recognize each other as human beings who actually have values, it changes the kind of conversation that you have.
You said that students feel heard and the community is starting to get the message. Do you think the lawmakers who were concerned about your hiring 5 years ago are getting that message?
I think so many of them have, and I think that's part of the reason that we saw in this session a lot of support for the work that we're doing. And we've actually engaged some of those lawmakers in the Institute for Advancing American Values so they could see firsthand what we were doing. And we can always learn to speak to the students. We can always learn more from our students and reach out to them more and try to engage with them more. And we're trying to do the same things with people in our communities. So if somebody has concerns, we don't turn our shoulder to them. We walk towards them and say, come talk with us, come meet our students, come meet our faculty, see what we're doing on campus, see our programming. And for a lot of people, it's been very eye-opening. Now, that doesn't mean it's always easy. To tackle these issues is incredibly hard. It's a part of the reason we're seeing so much strife. It's a part of the reason that we're seeing so many institutions where people are at tremendous odds with each other, and there's heartbreak in that. But I think universities play a really important role in helping people learn how to meet each other and talk with each other again. So we're striving to be that place.
As we look at the next 10 years, what's the trajectory of BSU to continue to meet those needs as well as the affordability concerns that families continue to have?
Thank you so much for asking that. So this university is a rocket ship. We have escalated and elevated what the university is doing. We've increased our research awards by 71%, our graduation rate by an incredible 39% in just the 5 years that I've been here. And we are present on a national and international stage in a way that has given our students opportunities they could have never had before. When I was at the G7 summit this summer, I was in the room with world leaders and a handful of universities and CEOs from major corporations across the world, and they wanted to know how to partner with Boise State. The opportunities that provides for our students and for Idaho is transformative. So we want to remain on that trajectory, keep doing all these incredible things. But as I said, one of my goals is that at the end of our comprehensive campaign, we will ensure that no Idaho student has unmet financial need at Boise State.
We have about 30 seconds left, but briefly, when you say unmet financial need, high interest student loans, how much of how much do they play into that conversation?
What we hope is that our students will take advantage of the programs that are available to ensure that the loans are low cost. And we advise students on financial aid. And we also ensure that we're getting our students access to as many of the grant dollars and philanthropy that we can.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Dr. Marlene Tromp, President of Boise State University, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for watching. We'll have much more online at idahoreports.org.